This is a Land Rover Defender. It's slow, it's noisy, it's uncomfortable, and according to some people, it's everything a Land Rover Defender should be. Now, those people who love this kind of Defender tend to have a fairly dim view of the new Land Rover Defender. If that's you, look away now. Say hello to the new Land Rover Defender V8. It's got a supercharged engine, more than 500 horsepower, and it's the most road-biased Defender yet. So if you're one of those people who happens to think a Defender should be agricultural like that old one, this probably isn't the car for you.
The giveaways are the 22-inch wheels and quad exhaust tips. This is the same 5-litre supercharged V8 that's been making Land Rovers and Jaguars romp along the road and roar like thunder for years. Here it produces 525 horsepower and 461 pound-foot of torque. The Defender V8 weighs 2,500 kilograms and romps to 62 miles per hour in 5.2 seconds, topping out at 149. It costs a whisker under £100,000.
Land Rover has tried to invoke the spirit of the original Defender by making this new one's cabin feel a bit utilitarian. So you've got things like exposed screw heads here, and this brace that runs across the full width of the car. It's sort of skeletal. However, what you actually notice are things like these enormous digital displays, which actually work really well. Not very Defender-ish, but they do work well. The infotainment system's very good. Quite chunky buttons here. Good seating position, nice and lofty, but you don't feel like you're sort of sitting on top of the car like you do in an old Defender. And have a look at this. A suede trimmed steering wheel. If you showed that to a farmer, he would laugh in your face. We know this engine very well. It's been used for a couple of decades now in countless Range Rovers and Jaguars. The Jaguar F-Type, the very fast saloon cars as well. And it's a mighty engine. It's always been a really characterful, exciting powertrain. Bundles of power and torque as well. And unlike a turbo engine, even a modern turbo engine, this one, because it's supercharged, it's got razor sharp throttle response. I mean, it's just so instantaneous. Way sharper than you get with any turbo setup. So what does 525 horsepower feel like in a Defender? Well, I mean, the car is quick. There's no question. It's really quick. This thing is also bloody heavy though. So it's not quite as sort of shockingly accelerative as 525 horsepower might make you think. Still, no complaints from me about the performance in this car. Also, the soundtrack is superb. There's a proper sort of rumbly, bassy V8 sound, but it's overlaid with a high-pitched supercharger whine. Now, I've not really heard that supercharger whine from this motor before, but it's definitely here in this one. It's right there. When you put your foot down and you run it all the way out to the limiter, that supercharger whine is right there. It sounds so cool. I mean, it's just a silly engine. I love that. Meanwhile, the 8-speed auto gearbox is pretty much faultless. It's so smooth in auto mode and then surprisingly responsive in manual mode as well.
The Defender V8 gets retuned air springs and much bigger anti-roll bars. There's a dynamic mode for the first time, plus an active rear differential to make it the most agile Defender yet, whatever that means.
So does it feel like the most road-biased Defender yet? Yeah, I suppose it does. It does still feel like a Defender though. I think the first thing you notice that's very Defender-y about this car is, despite those whacking great anti-roll bars, the moment you pitch it into a corner, it just does that. It just drops. It leans really heavily onto its outside wheels. And to begin with, it's quite spooky. It makes you think, oh my God, the thing's going to tip over. But then you grow accustomed to it. Then you sort of build your confidence in the car, and you learn that just because it's rolling quite dramatically, it doesn't mean it's going to tip. Of course it won't tip. Soon enough then, you find yourself chucking it along a flowing B road, allowing it to roll, but leaning on the grip. And you discover that it's pretty well balanced in corners. It feels quite keen, quite neutral. The steering has always been a highlight of this latest generation of Defender. So much better than the old ones. You actually have quite a lot of faith because the steering is responsive. It's sort of well judged. There's no vagueness about it really. And so you barrel along a road quickly, feeling pretty confident. If you switch it into comfort mode, I think that's when you begin to understand where this car is a bit compromised. The ride, for instance, it's sort of okay, it's fine, but it's just a bit busier than I'd like it to be, particularly on a slightly uneven road. It's just constantly fidgeting. And that just seems unnecessary. It seems like that would become a bit annoying in normal use. The trouble with giving a Defender 525 horsepower is that it needs to be able to use them. It needs to be able to cope with that power being deployed on a challenging B road, and so the chassis needs to be up to it. It needs to have a degree of sporting pretension just to be able to cope with all that power, and that is where you begin to erode some of the comfort and day-to-day usability. So yeah, if you approach this Defender V8 with the steely-eyed objectivity of a magazine road tester, you can start to pick flaws in it. It's not the most sort of well-resolved, most complete, most convincing version of this new Defender that there is. A long way from it, in fact. The reality is, no Defender wants to be a sporting car. It's just fundamentally not set up to be sporting. And so this very powerful, very fast V8 model is slightly uncomfortable in its own skin. I wonder if the Defender V8 would actually be a better car without the supercharger, with something like 400 horsepower, a nice woofily, rumbly V8 rather than this manic one. A load of money off the list price, a slightly more relaxed chassis setup. I just think that would be a more rounded, more convincing car overall. However, supercharged V8s with 525 horsepower like this one, they're not going to be around a whole lot longer, are they? And overall, I'm just glad that you can buy a Land Rover Defender, of all things, with this engine.
There have been V8 powered Defenders before, but this is the first that's been pitched as an actual performance car. In that respect, the Defender V8 has overreached. Despite all that power and the retuned chassis, it's no driver's car. But as silly cars become fewer and further between, the last few remaining unhinged lunatics should be celebrated. This, unquestionably, is one of them. Thank you for watching this PistonHeads video. Remember to comment below and subscribe to our channel.